Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire began the third generation of Pokémon games that are set in the Hoenn region, and they are easily some of the most beloved Pokémon games in the entire series. However, Generation 3 is also a generation that we don't really know too much about in terms of its development and its beta content. We've learned a lot about that type of stuff from Generation 2 and Generation 1 and even Generation 4, but we don't really know that much about Generation 3, that is, until now. There was recently a leak of Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire's source code that revealed a bunch of beta elements about the third generation games, including the thing that we always hope for with this kind of stuff, a bunch of cut Pokémon. Granted, this leak is not exactly as new as they usually are when I cover them. In fact, it happened almost a year ago, back in May of 2020. However, for some weird reason, I just barely learned about it thanks to a recent post from Dr. Lava, so shout out to him for kind of putting me in the right direction, but also I've literally never heard anyone else talk about this at all, even though there are tons of cut Pokemon to talk about and a lot of other cool beta stuff, and since that is just what I love to cover almost more than anything on this channel, I of course am going to cover it today. Now, really quick before we dive on into this, one important thing to note here is that while there are a bunch of cut Pokemon that were revealed as a part of this source code leak, the one single catch that comes along with it is that we don't have sprites for them, so we don't have any idea what they look like. The only thing we have on them is their Pokédex entries. They are indeed cut Pokemon, but we just have their Pokédex entries is essentially what it amounts to. However, based on the Pokédex entries, we do get a pretty good description of them, and they all sound really fascinating, and a couple of them even might sound pretty familiar to you as well, as in Pokemon that eventually did come to fruition, just not in Generation 3. So without further ado, we are just going to dive right on in here. This handy little chart that I have on screen is courtesy of the Cutting Room Floor, which is a cut content website that specializes in this kind of stuff for video games. I will leave a link to them in the description if you want to check it out for yourself. But basically, it's got all of the Pokemon that were in the Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire games as of this source code leak, which as you can see right here, dates back to around February 2002 to May 2002, so not too long before the games came out. If we scroll down here, we can obviously see Trico, Grovyle, Sceptile, a lot of Pokemon that we do know and love, so it consists of Pokemon that did make the final game, but then of course some Pokemon that didn't make the final game and were cut, like this guy right here. This is our first Pokemon that was cut. It was known at one point as the Black Stone Pokemon. Its Rubydex entry says, quote, "Because its face is always the same, what it is thinking is completely unknown. Looking at it produces a calming effect." And its Sapphire Dex entry reads, "After it rains, you can see it rubbing and polishing its wet body using a leaf. Once it has attained a black luster, it seems to be satisfied." And we can see its height and weight information right here, as well as the fact that it was a rock type. Now, as the Cutting Room Floor have noted over here, they seem to believe, or they note rather, that it sounds similar, the description that is, to Roggenrola from the Unova games. And that definitely holds true, because particularly the point about its face always being the same and what it's thinking is unknown, well, Roggenrola doesn't really have a face at all, so that lines up, and it obviously is a rock type and is a darker color as well, so I mean, it's complete conjecture. Some of these are not complete conjecture and are pretty much Pokemon from other generations that came out or were originally planned for Generations 3, as you'll see later. But as far as this one, maybe it's Roggenrola, maybe it's a complete other rock type. It's hard to know, but it's immensely fascinating. I just love this stuff. Like, I hope you guys love it too, because I just cannot get enough. Moving on though, we scroll down, we go through a few more actual Hoenn Pokemon that did make the games, and then we come to our next cut Pokemon. There's about 18 or so here, just so you're aware. A legitimate, like, good chunk, and we're going to go through all of them. This Pokemon was known as the Foster Pokemon. It has an early Dex entry, which some of them do, some of them don't, that comes from the February era of the game, and then we have these ones that come from the May era of the game, because there were 2 different points in time that were specified with the source code. So this Pokemon's Dex entry as of February of 2002 stated, if it has no offspring, it will seek out a small living thing and place it onto its back. It brushes its teeth by gnawing on hard objects. A Pokemon that wraps its tail around to make a cradle while raising its child on its back. Sometimes it bonds with a different creature. It can run 50 meters in 7 seconds flat. Sometimes it may accidentally drop its child. It brushes its teeth by gnawing on hard objects, and it is a normal type. This one sounds particularly interesting because it very much sounds like a Kangaskhan type Pokemon, a Chansey type Pokemon, like a caretaker type Pokemon similar to them. But it also sounds like it's a monkey of some kind because it describes how it wraps its tail around to make a cradle, and it just, to me, it sounds more like a monkey type creature. So it would, this one in particular sounds really fascinating. I really hope we eventually get sprites of these guys so we can know what they look like, because I would love to see what this guy looks like. Moving along, we also have another entry right here for a grass-type Pokemon. It is known as the Everlasting Summer Pokemon, and its Pokedex entry reads, a Pokemon that inhabits warm regions. Its tendency to act as a group becomes noisy when 3 or more gather. It's said that if you give the petals on its head to an unrequited, that is a big word, an unrequited partner, your love will come true. If you try to take its petals, it will become viciously angry. And the cutting room floor speculate that maybe this was a relative of Roselia of some kind. It's hard to say, to be honest. But I mean, sounds like an interesting grass type at the very least, so that is awesome. Another grass type that was cut from the game was known as the Shrub Pokemon, and its Dex entry reads, it collects a large amount of water inside its body and sprays it out like a shower while rotating. It is convenient to have around on hot summer days. It drinks over 100 liters of water a day. When the water it has collected in its body gets low, the leaves on both of its hands wither. And as the cutting room floor also notes, this Pokemon sounds like it had design elements of a shrub and sprinkler, so probably the kind of Pokemon that is meant to live with humans. It very likely could have been intended for that flower shop that you see early in the game, because this is the kind of thing that would just fit perfectly there, so maybe it was going to be designated as being a Pokemon that fit in that role, but then was scrapped for whatever reason. It's hard to say, but again, I can only imagine what this kind of Pokemon would look like. A shrub sprinkler Pokemon, like that sounds pretty cool. It's definitely kind of Pokemon I would like to see, so hopefully one day we do. Another cut Pokemon is a ghost type next. It's known as the Spirit Pokemon, and its Dex entry has 3 different ones. Say, it is said that if you get lost in the woods, it sounds its horn to show you the way home. At that time, if you see its figure, it is said to be happy. And more or less, this one says the same thing. This one goes on to say, it shakes its head left and right to make a beautiful xylophone-like sound. It communicates with friends using the timbre of its sounds. And Cutting Room Floor notes right here that the Spirit Pokemon is Flygon's category, which I believe is in the Japanese version, because I know in the English version, Flygon is the Mystic Pokemon. So this must be in the Japanese version. And so that, I mean, I don't know if this really has any relation to Flygon, because it is a ghost type. It doesn't really sound anything like Flygon. I personally get a very much of a Chimecho type vibe with the xylophone thing going on, because Chimecho is a psychic type and not a ghost type, but it does, obviously, it's based on a wind chime, so it's a similar type of thing. And with this being a ghost type, that's something that Chimecho isn't too far off of, so maybe it has some relation to Chimecho, possibly. It's hard to say, but this is, I mean, as a ghost type, and with it between its ghost type and its description, it sounds awesome, so hopefully we get to see it one day. Moving along, though, we have an electric type this time around, and it's known as the Imp Pokemon, which is very interesting. And its dex entries say, quote, absorbs the electricity from lightning with its horn. Recently, it seems to have learned to absorb electricity from power outlets in homes. Appears in areas where lightning strikes. The horn on its head falls off once a year. Those with bigger horns gain respect from their friends. Now, while this doesn't really sound, I mean, it definitely sounds unique and just overall interesting, but it does have a little bit of familiarity to an actually revealed Pokemon, or a existing Pokemon, and that would be Impedim, because Impedim, I believe, is also the Imp Pokemon. It's obviously based on an imp, and it also, this Pokemon sounds very mischievous because it learned to absorb electricity from power outlets, and so it very much almost seems like it has Impedim's personality as well. So, I mean, based on all of this stuff, I think it's very possible that maybe Impedim's design was derived or recycled from this Pokemon that had kind of just been in Game Freak's vault forever, and they decide to repurpose it as a fairy type for Generation 8. It's complete conjecture, complete speculation, but it's a possibility, which is fascinating nonetheless. Our next cut Pokemon is known as the Peat Moss Pokemon. Its dex entry reads, the moss growing on its body has a wonderful texture. However, as it absorbs strength through its moss, it is advised not to touch it for one's own safety. It is often found in damp, shady areas. When its beautiful yellow flower blooms, it emits a horrid, trash-like smell, and is a pure grass type. The cutting room floor note that this could possibly be a gloom type of Pokemon, with the flower being stinky, and its moss absorbing strength concept could maybe have been reused for Morlul, who has a similar concept to it. I'm personally not too convinced that it's like a beta Morlul or anything like that. Once again, it's hard to say, but I mean, just as fascinating as anything else, I'll tell you what. Scrolling through, we have a few more obviously established Hoenn Pokemon until we get to here with our next cut Pokemon. It is a flying type known as the Hawk Pokemon, and it says, quote, it only has a dex entry for the February part of this development, but it says, with its large wings, it can create wind as fast as 30 meters. A legend exists where it blew away the clouds and the sun shone down on the people. Now, this doesn't really sound like your average, like, starting bird Pokemon, like Tailo or Swellow or something like that. It definitely sounds more of a powerful Pokemon, a mid-game, maybe even a late-game Pokemon. I could even see this maybe possibly at one point being one of Winona's Pokemon as a flying type, because she's a flying type gym leader, she's later in the game, so that could possibly be a thing. It would definitely be interesting to know if this ever did get recycled into another Pokemon, or if it's still just kind of waiting in Game Freak's vault to eventually come to life. Moving along, we have got obviously some more regular Hoenn Pokemon. We get here, though, which is our next cut Pokemon, known as the Flower Pokemon, a grass psychic type, which is very interesting, and its dex entries say, quote, absorbs nutrients from the ground with its tail. Because its legs are extremely weak, it only moves less than 1 meter a day. Possesses the power to read human minds. It is said that if a cheerful person raises it with care, it will grow to have beautiful flowers. This is yet another one that's really hard to make out. It's hard to know if it is maybe a beta version of a Pokemon we already know or not. It doesn't sound anything like anything we know of, so probably, I mean, there's a good chance that it's still just cut, scrapped, and just waiting in the vault to come to life, like I said with that Hawk Pokemon. And, oh man, I really hope we get to see these one day, because they just sound, just based on their dex entries, sound amazing. They sound absolutely amazing. Next up, we have a water type known as the Timber Pokemon, and tell me if this sounds familiar. It creates tones by using its tail to play the disc, ball / bead atop its head. The size of its body seems to affect its timbre. Lives in small ponds filled with aquatic plants. When its friends come up and gather on the shore, they begin to play cheerful music. So, we have a water-type Pokemon that is distinctly associated with music. It has a tail, and it lives in ponds with aquatic plants. That definitely, very, very much so, sounds like Temple to me, which the cutting room floor also mentions right here, because that is exactly what Temple is. And I think it's very possible that this could be a beta Temple, because we actually see several Generation 5 Pokemon that seem to be connected to these cut Pokemon. We obviously already had the Roggenrola-esque sounding Pokemon, now we have Temple. There are a couple others you'll see here as well that seem definitely connected to Unova Pokemon, which gives Generation 3 a distinct connection to Generation 5, just like we saw with Sinnoh Generation 4 pulling a lot from the cut content of Generation 2. It seems that maybe Gen 5 Unova has pulled a lot from the cut content of Generation 3. So, very, very interesting. Moving on, though, we have another flying Pokemon known as the Sightseeing Pokemon, and its dex entry reads, a Pokemon that loves to fly with a human riding it. It quietly flies and is completely comfortable to ride. When it tires, it rests with its wings floating atop the sea. Has a calm personality, so it dislikes fighting. Its horns have magnet-like cells that act as a compass. Now, when I think of this Pokemon, two things come to mind for me. Number one, the first thing that comes to mind is Corviknight, because Corviknight is a Pokemon that is all about being ridden, and that's what this dex entry says, is that it's a Pokemon that is fine with being ridden and people ride it and it just loves it. But even more convincingly, I think this Pokemon right here might actually be that weird Pokemon that we've known about for a while because of its concept art, that is a fusion of Latios and Blaziken. And I say that for two reasons, because its dex entry says that it is a Pokemon that loves to fly with a human riding it, which is what we see this Pokemon doing in its concept art. A trainer, a character person of some kind that we also don't know about, is riding this Pokemon in its concept art. So that is completely consistent right here. Its other dex entry says it has a calm personality, so it dislikes fighting, and then also mentions it having a horn on its head. Well, a Pokemon that has a calm personality that dislikes fighting is exactly what Latios and Latios are. And in fact, Latios' dex entry and Latios' dex entry say a very similar type of thing about them not liking fighting. So I personally think it's and obviously the flying type lines up with that concept Pokemon too. So I am very, very much convinced that this very well could be that Latios Blaziken fusion Pokemon that we've known about for a while, but really had no idea what its deal was and where it came from and why it was split up. And if this is indeed that Pokemon, this comes from a build of the game that was about February to May of 2002, and these games came out not long after that. So that would effectively prove that Pokemon was in the game fairly late into development, which means Latios and Blaziken, at least in the forms that we know them, weren't. So very, very interesting if all of that was true, and just gives you a sense of how exactly the games came together and what, and just oh my gosh, yeah, I'm literally speechless at how cool I think this is. So hopefully you guys think it's cool too, because I think it's just phenomenally interesting. Moving along though, scrolling, got a bunch of Pokemon. Next up comes another normal type, It's known as the lottery Pokemon, which is really interesting, and its dex entries say it is confirmed to change its shape at the time of evolution, but what causes it is unknown. It is a hot topic among Pokemon researchers. How it manipulates its body is mostly unconfirmed. It has no visible mouth and ears, but it is only known to react to sound and light. This Pokemon sounds immensely interesting. It sounds like it is a shapeshifter, because it says it can change its shape at the time of evolution, so maybe it can turn into several different things like Eevee or something along those lines, but you don't know, maybe you don't know what you're gonna get when it evolves, because it's the lottery Pokemon. Like that's why it would be the lottery Pokemon, because it's kind of a unknown type of thing. And then this is also really interesting. It's second dex entry, but this one is particularly cool sounding, just because it sounds like very much like a gimmick Pokemon, like an Eevee or like a cast form, or a Pokemon with different forms, multiple evolutions, things like that. So I doubt that it's any Pokemon that we now know of. So it's probably still scrapped and just waiting to become official at this point, but it's one I would love to see because it sounds really cool. This one is really interesting because it's possibly Rayquaza, because as Cutting Room Floor note, it's described to have a long body that is also, I believe, it mentions in its dex entries that it's white, which is what Rayquaza's early color was stated to be in the Pokedex as of this source code leak. So this is possibly a beta Rayquaza, but it sounds completely different, so I wanted to read it to you guys anyway. And even if it is a beta Rayquaza, it shows how much Rayquaza's design changed. It is known as the White Dragon Pokemon at this time. It says, quote, "It is constantly on the move, lacks a permanent home. It constricts its opponents with its long body and attacks using its sharp beak. Its whole body is covered in white scales. When it flies, the scales fall off, making a sparkling belt of light in the sky." So if this is indeed beta Rayquaza, Rayquaza was once apparently more bird-like because it has a beak and was white and was apparently, it is a dragon type, but it was the white dragon. So if it is Rayquaza, it was completely different. If it's not Rayquaza, we have a really cool white dragon Pokemon on our hands that sounds amazing, that I would absolutely love to see one day. So moving along, we keep scrolling and we come here. Now listen to this and tell me if this sounds familiar. The Archaeopteryx Pokemon. The scales on its arms have come to resemble wings. It jumps like a glider, a living fossil from the dinosaur age. The feathers on its scales are very sharp and hard, acting as weapons that are strong enough to cut iron. They move in a flock of about 10 individuals, and it's a steel type. Now, while the steel type probably doesn't ring a bell, Archaeopteryx, fossil, this is most likely a beta version of Archon and Archeops from, once again, Generation 5, which is why I mentioned it seems that Generation 5 pulled a lot from Generation 3's beta content, because there's no way, I know we only have a description of the Pokemon, but there's no way that this is not an early version of Archeops, because it's literally the Archaeopteryx Pokemon, and it's also seems to be intended as a fossil Pokemon, given that it says a living fossil. So, I guess that could also mean that it survived from the dinosaur age and technically is an official fossil Pokemon, but one way or another, this has got to be an early version of Archeops, a beta version. And the fact that it was steel type, that shows that it probably was different at one point, which is also really cool. But fascinating to know that that Pokemon was most likely conceived and planned for Generation 3, and it's really cool to know that several Pokemon seem like they were planned from Generation 3 from Generation 5. And just gives you another inkling into how Game Freak go about developing their games, and they recycle content a lot of the time that they made from before but didn't make their games, and so it's just opening that door of that vault that we've all just been so fascinated by for years. It's just creaking it open a little bit more. That's what this is doing, and I will eat it up. Holy cow. Next, we get a Dragonfly Pokemon. which is also noteworthy, and its dex entry state lives in thick forests. It has a large body but is good at making fine turns, allowing it to deftly pass between trees. It can extract oxygen from water, so they occasionally live underwater as well. Loves eating the microorganisms in ponds. Now, while it's impossible to say, the fact that it is a Dragonfly Pokemon could mean that it was an early version of Yanmega, or maybe an alternate Yanma evolution, considering that Yanma is also a Dragonfly, and Yanmega would come just a generation later, so it would make sense maybe it was cut from Generation 3, brought back for Generation 4. That is also a possibility that is very exciting in and of itself. The next Pokemon on our list is also really interesting because it is a bug psychic type. This is a type that we did not get until Generation 8 with Orbeetle and Dottler. So the fact that it was planned as early as Generation 3 is really, really cool. But it doesn't seem to be a beta version of them because it is known as the Red Spider Lily Pokemon, and its dex entries state that its long antennae are extremely sensitive. It senses the slightest airflows to uncover its enemy's thoughts. It hypnotizes its opponents with its dance-like gestures and deep stare. Only female members of this Pokemon species have been found. So it's a female-only Pokemon. That's another detail we can glean from the dex entry, which is cool. But other than that, yeah, it doesn't seem to be an early version of Orbeetle like I stated. Seems to be completely different. But immensely interesting at the same time. I would love to know what this Pokemon was. Hopefully we find out one day. And scrolling along, that brings us to the end of the list, but there are two more Pokemon here that we still have to go over, and two really interesting ones. If we look at this evolution data table on the Cutting Room Floor website, this shows Pokemon that evolved differently than they did in the final game. If we scroll down here to Nosepass, we eventually find out that this Pokemon evolved into a Pokemon known as Kano, which is Torkoal's slot. And if we scroll down a little further here to look at the stats of these Pokemon, we find out that this Pokemon here that evolves into Torkoal has the Fire-type Flame Body ability and is literally a pre-evolution to Torkoal, because Torkoal sits in the very next spot in the Pokedex. So Torkoal at one point was going to have a pre-evolution and was going to evolve into Torkoal at level 20, but that was scrapped, and at least as far as the order of the Pokedex, or I guess the data of the Pokedex goes, it was eventually replaced by Nosepass according to the Cutting Room Floor. But to know that Torkoal had a pre-evolution, that's incredible, because Torkoal is one of the more notable, I guess you could say, Hoenn Pokemon, but people have been wanting it to have an evolution of some kind for years, so to know it originally did but doesn't anymore is so cool. And then the second and final interesting evolution cut Pokemon, I guess you could say, comes a little farther down here. If we scroll up to this evolution data table thing that I just mentioned a couple minutes ago, we see Plusle right here in the evolution data table. Well, that's weird because Plusle doesn't evolve. It says, though, that as of this source code, that Plusle was going to evolve at level 20 into a Pokemon known as Bachikon, which is Minun's slot in the final game. So basically what that says is that Plusle was originally going to evolve as well, and while it maybe was a Minus theme Pokemon like Minun, it was not a counterpart to Plusle like Minun is. It was actually an evolution, a stronger version of Plusle as opposed to a counterpart that eventually obviously got reworked into what we know today. Possibly, I mean, for reasons we can only speculate about, but probably because maybe balancing had something to do with it. Maybe the fact they wanted to have a Pokemon that was a little more focused on double battles, which was also introduced in this generation. That could have been part of it. But to know that Plusle was going to evolve as well, I don't think Plusle is a Pokemon that anyone ever would have conceived having an evolution, but it did, and that is absolutely phenomenal. I really, 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 really hope we get to see these Pokemon at some point, at least a couple of them, because they all sound phenomenal. And that pretty much wraps up all of the cut Pokemon that are on this table anyway, that were just completely scrapped. So that is pretty much going to wrap it up for this video, but my goodness, how fascinating is that? You guys are going to have to let me know your thoughts on these Pokemon in the comments below. Are there any that you in particular would really like to have actually made the final games? Let me know that as well. And if you want to check out all of this stuff for yourself, this page will be linked to the Cutting Room Floor website in the description as well. And shout out to them for making this all coherent and putting it all in that nice little table. So with that being said, once again, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you very soon with another one. And until then, as always, thanks again for watching. I love you very much. And I'll smell you guys later. Holy cow.